Welcome to Reformed Thinking. I mean, think about a courtroom, right? Where the prosecuting attorney is, well, the creator of the universe.
That is a pretty terrifying thought.
Right. And the defendants are the most respected, highly educated religious academics of the day. And you, sitting right there listening to us, you are in the jury box taking in this whole
The
cross-examination.
front row seats to the indictment.
Yeah, so today we are analyzing Matthew chapter 23, specifically verses 16 through 22.
Which is just a staggering piece of scripture.
It really is. And we are pulling our insights today from two very extensive theological commentaries. One is called Blind Guides and Holy Realities, and the other is The Blind Guides and the Binding Throne.
Both really solid resources for unpacking this.
Yeah. And the mission for this deep dive is to unpack Christ's devastating critique of religious hypocrisy. We want to dissect that human tendency we all have to, look for loopholes in the truth.
Oh, we love a good loophole.
We do. And we also need to uncover the inescapable sovereignty of God over every single word we speak.
Yeah, that courtroom analogy you used sets the stage perfectly for what is actually happening in the text.
Because Jesus isn't just giving a nice sermon here.
No, not at all. He is not offering helpful life suggestions. He is issuing a legal, prophetic indictment. And to grasp the full weight of this, we really have to look at the timeline.
Because timing is everything, right?
Spot on. We are situated right in the middle of Passion Week.
So this is the final stretch of days before the crucifixion.
Yes. Theologically and covenantally, this is the twilight of the dispensation of the law. Jesus is making his final public denunciation of the apostate leadership of national Israel.
And right after this, he shifts focus entirely.
He does. He transitions to his disciples to outline the prophetic future in the Olivet Discourse. He is establishing a firm Israel church distinction right here.
Like a definitive break.
Yeah. He is judicially rejecting the false shepherds of Israel, abandoning their desolate house, and preparing to inaugurate the church age through his impending death and resurrection.
Okay, hold on. For listeners who might not have a seminary degree, when you say the twilight of the dispensation of the law, give me the plain English version of that.
Sure, yeah.
Like, what does that mean for the average person standing in the crowd listening to Jesus say these things?
That is a great clarifying question. Think of it as a massive transition in how God administers his rule on earth.
Okay.
For centuries, God interacted with the world primarily through the national geopolitical entity of Israel. They had the physical temple, the Levitical priesthood, and the Mosaic law governing their civil and religious life.
The whole system.
Right. But that entire system was a shadow pointing forward to a future reality. So when I say the dispensation of the law is in its twilight, I mean the sun is setting on that old covenant arrangement.
Because the reality has arrived.
Yes. Jesus is the reality that all those shadows pointed to. He is officially stripping the corrupt religious leaders of their authority. The old system is being dismantled to make way for the new covenant, which will be established by his blood.
And that expands everything.
It expands beyond the nation of Israel to include the global church. So, the tension in the air during this speech would have been palpable. Jesus is dismantling their entire power structure right in front of their faces.
That context makes it so much heavier. We are talking about the scribes and Pharisees. These guys were the absolute pinnacle of religious authority in that system.
The untouchables, basically.
Yeah. But behind the robes and the long, pious prayers, they had engineered this elaborate system of casuistry regarding oaths.
A very complicated web.
And our sources point out that this system was later codified in Jewish rabbinic writings like the Mishnah. There are specific tractates mentioned, Tractate Shevet on oaths and Tractate Nedarim on vows.
Yes, very detailed legal codes.
It had created this bizarre two-tiered system of truth. Explain what that actually looked like on the ground.
Well, it was a highly structured system of deception.
Yeah.
To understand the Mishnah, you have to realize that the Pharisees believed in an oral law that was passed down alongside the written law of Moses.
Like an unwritten tradition.
Right. And around the year 200 AD, a man named Judah the Prince compiled these oral traditions into a written document, the Mishnah. But the traditions themselves were already in full swing during the time of Christ.
They were already practicing this stuff.
Absolutely. They taught that the validity of an oath depended entirely upon the specific object by which someone swore. They categorized sacred objects into different tiers of binding authority.
So it wasn't just I promise.
Oh, no. For instance, an oath sworn by the temple itself was considered null and void. You could break it without any legal consequence.
Wait, swearing by the temple meant nothing.
Nothing. But an oath sworn by the gold of the temple, that was strictly binding.
That is wild.
It gets worse. Similarly, they taught that an oath sworn by the altar was nothing, but an oath sworn by the gift placed on the altar was legally binding.
That is completely backward. How did they come up with such an arbitrary system? I mean, who invents that?
It was heavily influenced by the chaotic Greco-Roman style of contract negotiation prevalent in the broader culture of that era.
Oh, so they were borrowing from the pagans.
Yeah, pretty much. In the ancient Near East, commerce was face-to-face. Written contracts were not always available to the common person. Your word was your bond.
Handshake agreements.
Right. But human nature being what it is, individuals would try to bind others to an agreement while leaving linguistic loopholes for themselves.
A way to back out if things went south.
Yes. And the religious elite in Israel adopted this pagan practice and baptized it with religious terminology. They turned the solemn covenantal act of oath-taking into a deceptive game of legal gymnastics.
Man, this sounds a lot like downloading a new app today.
Oh, the terms of service.
Yeah, you scroll past the 50-page terms and conditions, knowing the tech company buried a tiny clause in paragraph 42 that lets them sell all your personal data.
And nobody reads paragraph 42.
Right. You agree because you want the app, but they rigged the rules.
Yeah.
The Pharisees were basically writing the theological terms of service to benefit themselves.
That is a really good analogy.
Because if you think about everyday ancient commerce, this would be an absolute nightmare.
Oh, it would have been debilitating for a functioning society. Imagine this scenario. You are a common laborer trying to buy a plot of land or trade livestock in the marketplace.
Just a regular guy.
Yeah. And the person you are dealing with swears by the altar that the sheep are perfectly healthy and have no defects.
Sounds like a solid guarantee.
You think you have an ironclad guarantee. You shake hands, make the trade, walk away. But the merchant knows the insider rules.
He knows he used the wrong formula.
Right. He knows he only swore by the altar, not the gift on the altar.
Right.
He is secretly crossing his fingers behind his back.
Oh, wow.
So when the sheep drop dead the next day, you have no legal recourse within their religious courts because the merchant used the non-binding formula. And the religious leaders sanctioned this behavior.
They protected the scammers.
They weaponized their theology for financial gain.
It is a total inversion of values. The sources say they valued the material wealth of religion over the spiritual reality of God's presence.
Very much so.
They engineered a system where the items with economic value, the gold and the gifts, were given the highest legal weight. This was the economic engine of their corrupt enterprise.
They commercialized the sacred.
But here's what I am wondering. If the general public relied on these leaders for their understanding of God, how did the average person react to realizing the system was rigged?
That is the big question.
I mean, did they play along for convenience, or were they burdened by it? Because it seems like the common people would eventually catch on to the grift.
Well, the tragedy is that false religion often produces willing participants. Some people undoubtedly felt crushed by the burden of trying to work through these arbitrary rules.
Feeling like they could never win.
Right, realizing they were constantly at a severe disadvantage against the highly educated scholars. The Pharisees laid heavy burdens on people's shoulders and would not lift a finger to help them.
Jesus says that explicitly.
He does, but others likely embraced the system because, let's be honest, the sinful human heart loves a loophole.
We really do.
If an esteemed religious leader tells you that you can make a solemn promise, sound incredibly pious doing it in public, but still maintain a legal, technical way out of your obligation,
Maybe we're going to take that deal.
the natural man is going to utilize that escape hatch every time. The leaders train the populace to think in terms of formulas and gradations of truth. That is how they rigged the system.
They created a whole culture of justified lying.
Yes. And Jesus quotes their false teachings directly to expose the anatomy of this massive loophole.
Let's look at the text itself to see how Jesus handles this. He says, "Woe to you, blind guides, who say, if anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound by his oath."
Calling them out directly.
And then he repeats the same logical structure regarding the altar and the gift on the altar. He is confronting their technicalities head on.
He is. And to understand the severity of what Jesus is saying here, we have to look closely at the language he uses. The Greek word Jesus uses for the temple in this specific passage is naos.
Naos. Okay, why is that specific word a big deal?
Because it is a critical architectural and theological detail. Naos occurs 45 times in the biblical text, and it refers specifically to the inner sanctuary, the Holy of Holies.
Well, not just the building in general.
No, this is the dwelling place of the Shekinah glory of God, the most sacred space in the universe according to the Old Covenant. Jesus deliberately avoids using the word Hiron.
And what does Highland mean?
That refers to the general temple precincts or the outer courtyards.
Wait, explain the difference between those two areas for me. Paint a picture of the physical layout so I can see why the word choice matters so much here.
Sure. So Herod's temple was a massive complex spanning acres. When you walked onto the Temple Mount, you were in the Hiron.
The outer area.
Right. This included the court of the Gentiles, where anyone could walk. This was where the money changers set up their tables and where a lot of general public teaching happened.
Lots of foot traffic.
Tons. But as you moved inward, there were stricter boundaries. You had the court of the women, then the court of the Israelites, then the court of the priests where the great bronze altar stood.
Getting more and more exclusive.
Exactly. But at the very center of it all was a towering, restricted building. That building was the naos.
The core.
Yes. Inside that building was the holy place, and behind a massive, thick veil was the Holy of Holies. Only the high priest could enter that inner room, and only once a year on the Day of Atonement, carrying the blood of a sacrifice.
So it's incredibly restricted.
The naos represented the unapproachable, holy presence of the living God.
So they are not just talking about the outer walls or the courtyard where people were buying pigeons.
No.
They are talking about the very epicenter of God's presence. And they're saying that the gold plating, the ornamental metal on the walls, is worth more than the presence of God himself.
That is aggressive blasphemy.
Yeah, it really is.
By elevating the gold over the naos, the Pharisees were insulting the very presence of God. Christ dismantles their false logic with rhetorical questions of magnitude.
How does he frame it?
He asks, "You blind fools, for which is greater, the gold or the temple that has made the gold sacred?" He proves syntactically and logically that the lesser is always sanctified by the greater.
Which makes perfect sense when you say it out loud.
Right. The gold has no inherent sacred value on its own. It is just metal. You could melt it down and make coins out of it.
Spend it in the market.
Yeah. It only becomes sacred because it is attached to the naos, which is the dwelling place of God.
The connection to God is what gives it value.
Precisely. And the same unassailable logic applies to the altar. An animal or a measure of grain is just livestock or farm produce until it is placed upon the altar of God.
The altar changes its status.
Yes, the altar sanctifies the gift. The Pharisees completely reversed the true order of sanctification.
The absurdity is just glaring when you lay it out like that. I mean, they valued what could be counted and displayed over the divine ordinance itself.
A completely material focus.
It exposes a heart that is radically disordered. Our sources note that this prioritizes the material, economic engine of religion over the spiritual reality.
Which is a timeless problem.
Ooh, for sure. We can easily see how this exact mindset persists today. You see this in modern prosperity gospel ministries.
Absolutely.
They value measurable financial markers over genuine holiness. It is the exact same spirit. They measure the blessing of God by the size of the bank account, the gold, rather than proximity to the temple, the actual presence and truth of God.
The parallels are undeniable. And the insidious thing is, the Pharisees did not discard holy language.
They still sounded religious.
Very much so. They kept all the right religious vocabulary, they affirmed the temple and the altar verbally, they wore the right clothes, and prayed in the right posture.
Looking the part.
But they quietly assigned decisive, functional weight to what was materially valuable. This is how hypocrisy operates. It rearranges holiness around human advantage.
Because you can control gold.
Right. Gold can be counted, admired, deposited, possessed. A physical gift can be displayed, measured, consumed. But the true temple and the true altar direct attention away from human contribution and point entirely toward God's sovereign claim over our lives.
Hypocrites want the prestige of religion without the submission it requires.
That's a great way to put it.
But I can understand valuing gold because it has tangible worth. People like money. It buys comfort. It buys security.
Sure.
But from a purely logical standpoint, how did the Pharisees justify this theological inversion to their followers without sounding blatantly greedy?
They had a system for it.
Like, did they have some convoluted theological argument to back this up? Or was it just raw, unchecked clout?
Oh, they justified it through an elaborate illusion of meticulous piety. They would argue that the gold given to the temple treasury, or the specific gift placed on the altar, represented a dedicated human sacrifice to God.
A special offering.
Yes, they called this a korban. They elevated the human act of giving. They could argue to the public that because a person had specifically and voluntarily consecrated this tangible item out of their own pocket, the vow attached to it carried supreme legal weight.
So they spun it to sound super dedicated.
Exactly. But beneath that thin veneer of dedication was a system designed to protect their own wealth and influence, because the temple treasury was massive and they controlled it.
Following the money always reveals the truth.
It does. And they could not see the logical absurdity of their position because spiritual blindness prevents logical self-reflection.
About their own lives.
When you lose the fear of God, your theology becomes entirely self-serving, even when it is demonstrably absurd. And that leads directly into Christ's severe condemnation of their spiritual state.
Right, because Jesus does not hold back. He starts with the word woe. Woe to you, blind guides. He also calls them fools and blind. This brings up the concept of total depravity on display.
And the linguistic severity of these terms cannot be overstated. The word woe in the original Greek is wei.
Way. Sounds harsh just saying it.
It is. This is not a sad sigh of resignation. It is not a gentle pastoral correction from a life coach.
Not a slap on the wrist.
No, it is a terrifying interjection of doom. It is a prophetic curse declaring impending divine wrath upon the unrepentant.
Wow.
It stands in stark contrast to the word blessed, or makarioi, that Jesus used at the beginning of his ministry in the Sermon on the Mount.
Back in chapter 5.
Right. In chapter 5, he was pronouncing the blessings of the kingdom. Here in chapter 23, Jesus is speaking as the supreme divine judge, pronouncing the curses of the covenant upon those who break it.
And the phrase blind guides, that is a devastating oxymoron.
Complete.
I mean, if you are a guide, your one fundamental job is to see the path. If you are blind, you're the last person on earth who should be leading anyone anywhere.
Precisely. And the Greek word translated as fools is moroi.
Which sounds a lot like...
Yes, it is the root of the English word moron.
Hmm.
But in this specific biblical context, it does not mean someone with a low IQ.
Not about intelligence.
No, it signifies someone who is morally and spiritually obtuse. Someone completely lacking any capacity for divine wisdom.
Just a total block.
Yes. Our sources highlight that this confirms the Reformed doctrine of total depravity. These leaders possessed the external law. They had the ancient scrolls, the rabbinic traditions, the phylacteries, the recognized public offices.
All the outward stuff.
But without the internal illumination of the Holy Spirit, the natural man is entirely blind to the things of God. They were spiritually dead while walking around in religious garments.
Okay, stop right there. You just used a major theological term, total depravity.
I did, yeah.
Give me the plain English version of what that means, and maybe what it does not mean. Because people hear the word depravity, and they immediately think of serial killers or the worst criminals imaginable.
That is a very common misconception. Total depravity does not mean that every person is as thoroughly evil as they could possibly be in their outward actions.
So the Pharisees weren't necessarily committing terrible crimes in the street.
Right. They were actually quite moral in their outward behavior. They did not rob banks or murder people in the streets. Total depravity means that the totality of human nature has been infected and corrupted by sin following the fall in Genesis 3.
The whole system is infected.
Yes. Our minds, our emotions, our desires, and most critically, our wills are bound by sin. The natural man does not seek God. He cannot understand the things of the Spirit of God.
It's broken at the source.
His default setting is rebellion and self-justification. It means we are completely incapable of saving ourselves or producing genuine righteousness without God's grace intervening first.
It is like hiring a financial advisor who operates exclusively using monopoly money.
I love that comparison.
Like, they might sound incredibly confident giving you directions. They might have beautifully designed charts and graphs. They might wear a nice suit.
But the currency is fake.
Exactly. I mean, spot on. They are leading you straight into bankruptcy because the currency they are dealing in is entirely worthless in the real world.
Yes.
The danger of blind leadership is terrifying. A blind man on his own needs compassion.
Yeah.
We help him cross the street. But a blind guide is a literal threat to everyone following him.
That analogy hits the mark perfectly. And this doctrine completely destroys the Arminian notion of human autonomy.
Hold on, there's another seminary term. What is the Arminian notion of human autonomy?
Well, Arminianism generally teaches that while humans are fallen, God gives everyone a sort of preceding grace that restores their free will just enough so that they can autonomously choose to accept or reject God.
Like a neutral starting point.
It suggests the human will is a neutral territory, yeah. But Jesus' description of the Pharisees shatters that idea. The sinner does not possess an autonomous free will to manipulate God or to see the truth clearly on his own.
Because the blindness is part of their nature.
Yes, the Pharisees were operating out of a nature that was fundamentally corrupt. Their wills were bound by their sin. They were entirely incapable of understanding the truth without divine intervention.
And as a result,
They were leading the spiritually blind masses directly into the pit of eternal judgment. Their blindness was a feature of their fallen nature.
so what does this mean for their accountability?
That is the crucial question.
If they were completely spiritually blind, as the doctrine of total depravity suggests, how is it fair to hold them responsible? Are they still morally culpable for leading people astray if they literally lack the capacity to see the truth?
This is one of the most vital theological questions a person can ask. Total depravity means that man is unable to choose God or desire true holiness on his own. However, this moral inability does not negate moral responsibility.
Okay, unpack that.
They are not physically forced to sin against their will. They sin because they want to.
They love the sin.
Right. The Pharisees were blind because they loved the darkness. Their blindness was a judicial hardening, a result of their own willful, repeated suppression of the truth.
They kept choosing the wrong path.
They chose their man-made traditions over God's clear revelation. Their accountability is absolute because they operate under God's sovereign jurisdiction as rational creatures who willfully rebelled against the Creator's design.
Which brings us right to the text again.
Yes, this connects seamlessly to the climax of Jesus' argument. He strips away any illusion that they operate outside of God's authority, pointing directly to the throne of heaven.
Which brings us to that rapid-fire climax of the passage, found in verses 20 through 22.
Yeah.
Jesus says, "Whoever swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it. And whoever swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it. And whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits upon it."
The architecture of this passage reveals the author's meaning with absolute mathematical precision.
It builds so quickly.
When we look at the Greek structural symmetry here, we see Jesus using a series of articular participles.
Whoa, seminary alert again. Break down the Greek grammar for me.
Oh.
What is an articular participle, and why does it matter to the guy listening to this in his car on the way to work?
Fair enough. In the Greek text, Jesus repeatedly uses a specific phrasing, the one having sworn. That is the articular participle.
Okay.
He couples that phrase with the Greek preposition en, which means in or by. He repeats this exact grammatical formula over and over.
Like a hammer.
Yes. By doing this, he builds an unbreakable chain link fence around their logic. He says swearing by the altar inherently includes the sacrifices on it. Swearing by the temple inherently includes the God who dwells in it. Swearing by heaven inherently includes the throne of God.
You can't separate them.
You cannot. It is a brilliant, escalating structural ascent. He starts at the earthly bronze altar, moves to the grand physical temple building, and ascends directly to the sovereign throne of the universe.
It's like he's calling their bluff.
Jesus is saying, you want to play word games? Let's play. If you touch the earthly altar with your words, you touch the God of heaven. You cannot compartmentalize your speech.
So Jesus is essentially using their own legal language to build an inescapable cage around them. He is removing all their blind spots.
Every single one.
This proves this passage is not just a simple ethical treatise on how to be a more honest neighbor. It is an assertion of the omnipresence and sovereignty of God over every single human utterance.
Over every word.
There is no secular versus sacred divide. You cannot say, well, I made that promise at the office, not at church, so it doesn't really count.
No, God hears it all.
No human vow, no contract, no casual promises made outside of God's jurisdiction.
And this truth annihilates modern post-truth pragmatism.
Also,
Well, we live in an era that actively promotes a relativistic view of truth. We utilize psychological therapy speak to excuse the sins of our own hearts. We rebrand lying as managing optics or controlling the narrative.
oh, corporate spin.
Yeah. But God demands absolute integrity. The sources also point out that this text acts as a massive historical bulwark against complex doctrines of mental reservation.
What do you mean by mental reservation?
Throughout history, various religious systems, including Roman Catholic casuistry in the medieval period, created elaborate loopholes.
More loopholes.
Always. They developed the idea of mental reservations where you could legally state one thing out loud but hold a contradicting thought in your head and therefore not be guilty of a sin.
So crossing your fingers mentally.
basically.
Yeah.
For example, you might say out loud, "I did not break the vase," while thinking in your head on a Tuesday. You effectively bypassed God's absolute standard of truth by using a technicality in your mind.
Wow, that is sneaky.
Jesus says that is completely impossible. Every word you speak out loud and every thought in your head is tethered directly to the throne of God. You cannot outsmart the omniscient one.
The Pharisees treated God like a motion sensor security camera in a warehouse.
Trying to find the blind spots.
Yeah, they thought if they moved slowly enough, if they used the right angles, if they stood in the shadows of the physical building, they could slip past the lens and do whatever they wanted.
Play the angles.
But Jesus says the camera is always on, it is recording high-definition audio, and God himself is sitting directly at the monitor. He hears every single syllable. There are no blind spots.
That is a staggering, terrifying reality. The universe is not fragmented into zones where God is present and zones where he is absent.
He's everywhere.
Heaven is not some empty abstraction floating in the clouds. It is the active sphere of God's sovereign rule. When you speak in God's world before God's face. Coram Deo, as the Reformers said, before the face of God.
But if every single word is tethered to the throne of God, doesn't that make casual, everyday conversation incredibly daunting?
It should.
I mean, how does a believer function without being paralyzed by the fear of accidentally misusing language or making a promise they cannot keep because circumstances change? If God's standard is absolute perfection in speech, we are all doomed.
Yes. The law is indeed meant to be terrifying. It is meant to crush us.
To bring us to the end of ourselves.
Right. It is meant to be paralyzing to our own self-righteousness. When we truly grasp the omnipresence of God and his absolute demand for perfect truth in our innermost being, our immediate reaction should be utter despair over our own deceitful hearts.
Because we just can't do it.
We cannot keep this standard. Our tongues are naturally bent towards self-preservation, flattery, and perjury. James chapter 3 says the tongue is a restless evil full of deadly poison.
A fire.
Yes. This despair you are feeling is the precise function of the law. It strips away all our excuses and drives us desperately to the only viable solution, the perfect fulfillment of the law in Jesus Christ.
Which is the good news.
Exactly. Well, yes, it shifts our conversation directly into redemptive history.
If our natural instinct is to lie to protect ourselves, and God's standard is absolute perfection, we are in a completely hopeless situation unless someone else fulfills that standard for us.
Our only hope.
This passage leads us entirely away from moralism. We are not just looking at a lesson on how to be a more honest person. We are looking directly at the cross.
Yes.
Jesus is functioning here in his office as the eschatological prophet, the one prophesied by Moses in Deuteronomy 18. He is uniquely authorized to interpret the law and expose the corruptions of the false shepherds.
Our sources draw magnificent Christological connections here. Jesus speaks of the temple and the altar, the sacred institutions of the Old Covenant.
The shadow.
But as the Gospel of John reveals in chapter 2, when Jesus says, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up," he was speaking about the temple of his body.
He is the reality.
Jesus Christ himself is the ultimate true temple. He is the Word made flesh, the exact location where the holy God and sinful man meet for reconciliation.
And what about the altar?
Hebrews chapter 13 identifies Christ as the ultimate altar. He perfectly sanctifies the ultimate gift, which is the sacrifice of his own sinless body.
So it all points to him.
The old bronze altar only sanctified ceremonially, pointing forward to a future reality. Christ secures real, permanent cleansing and reconciliation.
Think about the profound irony happening in this scene. You have the Pharisees standing in the physical temple precincts, weaponizing the language of the physical temple to lie and cheat everyday people.
Right in the courtyard.
And standing right in front of them, looking them in the eye, is the true temple of God, speaking absolute truth. They are completely blind to the glory standing right in front of them.
It is tragic. And because of the total depravity we discussed earlier, we are entirely incapable of keeping the absolute standard of truth demanded by the throne of God. We need an outside savior.
Someone to do it for us.
This is why the doctrine of substitutionary atonement is so vital. Christ provides both active obedience and passive obedience.
Break those two terms down for me. What is the difference between active and passive obedience, and why do I need both?
Well, Christ's active obedience means he perfectly fulfilled the righteous demands of the law on our behalf during his entire earthly life.
So, he lived the perfect life.
Yes. Every word he spoke was absolute truth. Every vow he made, he kept. He never exaggerated, never flattered to gain advantage, never used a loophole.
Completely flawless.
He lived a life of absolute, flawless integrity. That perfect record of truth-telling is imputed or credited to our account when we believe in him.
Okay, so that covers the active part.
And his passive obedience means he willingly subjected himself to the penalty of the law that we deserved.
Taking the punishment.
He bore the fierce wrath of God on the cross for our lies, our hypocrisies, our broken vows, and our deceptive terms of service. He absorbed the punishment for every time we crossed our fingers behind our backs.
That is so freeing to hear.
We need a mediator who both cleanses our guilt and provides us with a perfect record of righteousness, and Christ is that perfect mediator.
But let me ask this. If Christ already fulfilled the absolute standard of truth for us, and his perfect record is credited to us, does that mean our ongoing struggles with honesty are just covered under grace?
Ah, the antinomian question.
Right. Is there still a strict standard we are expected to uphold, or does grace mean we can be a little lax with our words now because Jesus already paid the bill?
That is a crucial distinction to make. We do not look to the law for our justification. Christ secured that completely. We cannot earn our way to heaven by telling the truth.
Right.
However, the Reformed tradition recognizes the third use of the law, the tertius usus legis.
Translate that Latin for me. What are the three uses and what is the third one doing?
The first use of the law is as a mirror, showing us our sin and driving us to Christ. We just talked about that.
Shows us we need help.
Yes. The second use is as a curb, restraining evil in society through civil laws and fear of punishment.
Keeping order in the world.
Right. The third use, the tertius usus legis, applies specifically to the regenerate believer. For the Christian who has been saved by grace, the law acts as the perfect rule of life to guide our grateful obedience.
Ah, so it's a guide.
We are united to Christ, who said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Therefore, our words must reflect his character. Grace does not excuse deceit. Grace empowers truthfulness.
It changes our desires.
We tell the truth not to get saved, but because we are saved and have been given a new nature that loves the truth.
Applying this third use of the law is like having a perfectly tuned GPS in your car.
I like that analogy.
The GPS does not build the engine, it does not put fuel in the gas tank, it doesn't make the car move.
That is what Christ's atonement does.
Right. But the GPS shows you the exact path to drive on so you don't crash your car into a ditch of hypocrisy. It guides the vehicle that grace has already built and fueled.
That is a very helpful way to look at it. Our sources call for direct, uncompromising, and highly pastoral application here.
Starting at the corporate level.
Yes. Corporately, the church must violently reject pragmatism. We must reject the seeker-sensitive movement that measures success by the gold of budgets, slick marketing, and weekly attendance numbers, rather than proximity to the temple of faithful biblical preaching.
Stop treating the church like a business.
We must resist the urge to commercialize holy things to draw a crowd. The church must operate with absolute integrity in its financial dealings and its public messaging.
And individually, believers must apply this every single day in the trenches of normal life.
Where it gets tough.
Right. The sources mention complementarian headship. Men are called to be the spiritual heads of their households, which means they must lead their families in truth.
It starts in the home.
There cannot be a two-tiered system of honesty. You cannot have one standard of truth for Sunday morning worship, where you sing hymns about God's holiness, and a completely different compromise standard for Monday morning business practices or filling out your tax returns.
You can't separate the two.
Christians cannot use legal technicalities to avoid their covenantal obligations to their spouses, their children, or their employers.
The sources cite staggering global statistics regarding religious fraud and ecclesiastical embezzlement.
This is a massive problem.
Billions of dollars are lost every year because people within the visible church believe the lie of the Pharisees. They think they can manipulate the material things of God, the church budget, without standing before the throne of God.
They lose the fear of God.
They treat the church like a secular corporation. Believers must cultivate a culture where vows actually matter, where financial transparency is non-negotiable, and where absolute truthfulness is the expected norm. We speak, act, and spend money in the presence of the one who hears, sees, and judges perfectly.
But practically speaking, in a corporate environment that rewards public relations spin, legal liability protection, and aggressive marketing.
The real world.
Right, the real world. How does a believer practice radical, uncompromising honesty without losing their livelihood or being taken advantage of by the world? It seems like telling the absolute truth in a cutthroat business world is a fast track to getting fired or going bankrupt.
It requires an overriding fear of God. Proverbs says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Our primary allegiance is to the sovereign God of the universe,
Not the bottom line.
not to our temporal earthly brand, our quarterly profit margins, or our financial security. A believer practices radical honesty by trusting that God is sovereign over the results of their obedience.
Leaving the results to him.
The world says protect your brand, manage the optics, use the loopholes. Christ says let your yes be yes and your no be no. The godly man does not need to resort to manipulation because he fears displeasing God far more than he fears any earthly financial consequences.
He trusts God to provide.
He trusts that God will provide for him on the path of righteousness.
So what have we uncovered in this deep dive? Christ exposes the blind guides who inverted holiness for financial gain.
Calling them out for their greed.
He proves syntactically and theologically that every oath, every promise, and every casual word we speak is tethered directly to the throne of God.
The unbreakable chain.
This text strips away human autonomy. It destroys religious pragmatism. It drives us to despair of our own righteousness so that we flee to Christ.
The only safe harbor.
Because he is the true temple. He is the perfect altar. He is our substitutionary sacrifice.
I want to leave you with a final thought drawn from the historical context of our source material.
Let's hear it.
This exact physical temple, whose gold the Pharisees prized so highly, the very magnificent building where Jesus stood to pronounce this terrifying woe, was completely destroyed by the Roman army under Titus in AD 70.
Just wiped off the map.
The gold melted in the fires and ran down between the stones, just as Jesus predicts in the very next chapter of Matthew 24.
They lost the very thing they valued most.
If God was willing to utterly obliterate the physical epicenter of Israel's worship because the leadership corrupted its holy purpose with lies and hypocrisy,
It makes you think.
how severely must he view the hypocrisy we tolerate in our own lives, especially knowing that the scriptures call our very bodies the temple of the Holy Spirit?
That is a staggering reality to consider. The camera is always on, and the perfect judge is sitting on the throne. Thank you for joining this session of Reformed Thinking. We invite you to examine your own heart, abandon your man-made refuges, stop looking for loopholes, and run to the cross.